Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
We should probably go ahead and get into this.
Well, we're not going to have the 3 minutes of lead up talking about action figures?
You know, that was my bad.
No, that was fucking beautiful. I want you to, like, start doing more Geeky Gentlemen, where, like, we don't fucking start talking about the topic until, like, 20 minutes into the video.
No, I'm not doing that, Steve. I'm not doing that.
I need that so much.
No. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
Hey, what's up? I'm that Matt Kid.
And I am a geek for fun.
Ah, Geek for Fun is here.
Hello, Governor. John Constantine and all that. Doctor Who. God Save the Queen.
This is never not going to be funny. There will never come a day in which this is not hilarious.
I don't know what you mean, fellows.
So, Mr. A Geek for Fun, I was just wondering, what is your favorite member of the British royalty?
Oh, you know, I really do appreciate the new really hot woman from America that married into the family. What was her name? The woman from Suits, that lady.
Love that Steve just can't even pretend to maintain the
Nope,
accent.
not even a little bit. The accents are fucking hard, man.
Yeah? I don't know. Anyway, so Steve picked a review topic for us, and you may have heard in the last episode, for all of the people that watch, you know, back-to-back episodes of Geeky Gentlemen, you may have heard Matt, like, audibly cum.
A little bit, I did.
So Matt, what are we talking about tonight?
We are talking about the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic, Conan the Barbarian from 1982. Directed by John Milius, written by John Milius and Oliver Stone. Now, that's actually a little bit of a weird story, because Oliver Stone did write an initial draft, but John Milius only came on if he could rewrite the entire script. But enough of Oliver Stone's story is in there that he You know what? We'll get into it.
To be fair, we'll definitely get into it, but to be fair, I think Oliver Stone's, like, initial vision for it was probably a better idea for a movie, honestly, but I still really like both versions, so we'll get there.
It was. And Roy Thomas also did a treatment that would have been better than both of them, but oh well.
Roy Thomas wrote the Conan comics over at Marvel for a while, didn't he?
So Roy Thomas was the man in charge of Conan comics at Marvel. He was in charge of getting the license for it because readers, because like Conan paperbacks were really popular at the time, like paperback books, and readers would write to Marvel being like, "Oh, do sword and sorcery comics," and Stan Lee was just like, "I don't fucking know about that shit." And so he told Roy Thomas, "I don't know, figure it out. Find us a character we can make comics of." And he was just like, "Oh, well, you know, Conan's too big and popular. They don't want to play ball with us because we're just a dinky comic book company. We'll go after one of the like rip-offs of Conan." But then he decided to pitch to Conan rights holders anyways, just as like a goof, like sending your resume out to someone you know is not going to hire you. And they were just like, "Oh, LOL, bet, let's do it." And how it went. That's like literally how it went down. And then Roy Thomas he wrote like a couple issues with the intention of like leaving it to another writer, but he was just like, "Oh, fuck this is so good," and then he just stayed on the book forever.
Right, this has got a good vibe for it. His Avengers stuff definitely has like a Conan in space vibe, so that tracks.
But yeah, we're talking about Conan the Barbarian from 1982, and I'm fucking excited. I'm a big Conan fan.
All right, so are you excited because you actually really like this movie, or you just like Conan?
Um, I mean, I just like Conan in general. I'm a big fan of the original, like, Robert E. Howard short stories. This movie I do like. Like, I don't want to give the impression that I don't like it. However, this film is contentious among Conan fans with pretty good reason, and I'm sure we will get into it. I'll say that this is a good movie, and I do like this movie. But there are reasons why, like, Conan fans have issues with it that are just purely adaptational things. So I like both. I like Conan and I like the movie.
Interesting. I don't know, just last week and you're like, oh, we'll talk about that, and I'm so excited. And then, like, in the chat, you're like, yeah, and we'll talk about how this is, like, a problematic portrayal that doesn't really line up with Robert E. Howard's. I'm like, okay, this is a mixed bag of a movie for Matt, from what I'm gathering. I will say this is my first time ever watching this, and this is only like my second or third time ever consuming something directly Conan the Barbarian. So this was an interesting experience. I don't know if this bodes well or bodes poorly for the movie, but I really like James Earl Jones in this. He's
really good.
Easily the best part for me, and it's kind of criminal that he doesn't get more time on screen and doesn't get a big climactic battle, but I guess that's kind of the intent. But yeah, this is James Earl Jones was definitely my my reason for living with this movie.
Oh yeah,
Your reason for living with this movie.
James Earl Jones is phenomenal, and it's funny because, like, the success of Star Wars was a big deal in galvanizing, like, the production of this movie, and so like James Earl Jones being in it just kind of makes sense with that. I know who else? Max von Sydow was in talks for that role at one point, but James Earl Jones is phenomenal as
Max von Sydow.
Say what?
Max von Sydow?
Yeah, Max von Sydow. He was in talks to play the main villain. But they decided to go with James Earl Jones, and I have to assume that's because of Star Wars. Like, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, you're talking what?
This is 82.
Return of the Jedi was 83, so
yeah,
that's right off the heels of it, right? Was Return of the Jedi 83 or 85? I can never remember. 83. Okay.
Star Wars was 77. I think Return of the Jedi was 83, because Empire is like 80, right? So it would have been right in between those two.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is like right before the final film in the thing.
Yep.
Just have to look that up because now I'm curious. Yeah, 83. No, so it's awesome to see James Earl Jones. The choice for the haircut's a weird one. But he's too cool. I don't know, this is like a weird time also in Arnold's career as an actor. Because, like, when he first came on the scene, if I remember correctly, his first, like, Hollywood film where he's the starring character is a Hercules movie. But they actually, like, just get a different actor to dub over him because his English was so poor that, like, you couldn't really understand anything through his accent. And then it's funny because years later they ended up releasing the movie with the original audio, and it's terrible. So, like, that was like late 70s, early 80s that Arnold popped on the scene with that, and then you get to this, which is just a couple years later, and he's getting better, but it is kind of interesting that they go out of their way to not let him talk very much, and kind of make almost a silent movie at points, and it's I guess particularly funny that he's around so many other actors that are known particularly for their very distinct and like, you know, pleasing voices, like James Earl Jones and Mako.
Mako being in this movie kind of blew
Mako.
my mind.
Yeah, it was like, I heard the voice as the narration started up. I'm like, is that fucking Aku?
Right? Fucking Aku! Oh my god, I love that so much. He's so good in this. I rarely ever get to see him, like, not just be a disembodied voice, so it's kind of hyped to see him on screen acting.
He's great. I always forget that he actually shows up, and then he does, and I'm always just like, yes! He's phenomenal in this. I think everyone really has a, like, Schwarzenegger, they write Conan to be a much more, I guess, monosyllabic, not quite as talky character, but I do think he pulls it off, and I think most of the supporting cast does a really good job here.
Well, I mean, this is like pre-Terminator, so it's still getting to that point where Arnold is learning how to act, and learning what works for him and how to do, like, cold, detached delivery as opposed to just doing any kind of delivery, period. It's a really hard thing to really get good, because there's cold, detached delivery can just come off like bad acting, and yet it's the thing that Arnold's actually legitimately good at by the time you get to, like, especially Terminator 2.
I feel like... No, I agree with you. I feel like part of it is also that this is one of those movies where I think Arnold was more aware that he had to give, like, a legit performance, and he wasn't being cast just because he was big. Because he actually lost weight to play this part. Like, he stopped doing the full-on bodybuilder routine, and started looking for, like, a leaner physique that would suit this version of the character more. And I feel like you do kind of get a sense that Arnold's not the greatest actor in the world. I don't think anyone's going to make that argument, and I don't think anyone's going to be mad for me even going so far as to say he's kind of not a good actor. But he has very good comedic sensibilities, and I feel like he has that stoicism that's he's famous for down pretty well. And this is the movie where I feel like he's trying the most to have a range of emotions.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. No, actually, I take that back. That's not true. This is not the movie where he's trying the most for a range of emotions.
Is it True
That
Lies?
is clearly Jingle All the Way.
Oh, that's true. Jingle All the Way, top 10 movies of all time. You're right. I forgot about that.
100%.
Yeah.
Greatest movie ever. Greatest superhero movie that's not based on a superhero comic.
But I don't know. It's just interesting to see the early stages of Arnold's career and how it's taken shape, because it's a good performance, but, like, what they give him, it would be pretty difficult to turn in a bad performance.
I don't think
you'd honestly have to try. Really? Like, it's...
Well, okay, wait. Let's maybe... I feel like we're kind of gotten right into the weeds of it, but we haven't kind of, like, set the tone here. What does everyone think about this movie before we go any further?
I don't think I'd watch it again, but I don't regret watching it. I didn't hate myself while watching it this time.
I do like it. I mean, I mean, obviously, I'm going to get more into it. It pulls from a lot of disparate elements throughout Conan's publication history. It's pulling from very specific places and a couple places, and I do like the movie. I think it's a lot of fun. I think Arnold's performance as Conan, or at least the character that is written to be Conan in this movie, is a lot of fun, and honestly, I just enjoy the heck out of this movie. So no, I generally do quite like it. Sure.
Okay, because I honestly think this is a really good movie. I think this is, like, genuinely a really, really good movie. I'm surprised, because I thought we were going to be kind of... I thought it was going to be more of like an Alfie, me, and Ian really like this movie. And Matt respects the movie, but doesn't like it because it's not a good Conan movie. But I'm surprised to see we're all kind of on the one spectrum of mid-range to good.
Like, I'm not going to get that mad about a movie that was made before I was born not being a great adaptation of stories that were written before my parents were born. I can only get so mad about it, and I'm just like, I wasn't even into Conan until long after this movie had been released, so, like, it would just be stupid of me to get mad at it. Whenever there's something that is not representative of Conan, I just kind of laugh it off. And I think the heart of Conan is still in there, so it's just I can only be so mad at it, man.
Yeah. I don't know, like, I didn't hate it or anything. It just... Part of it's just... It's a bit of an older movie. This is, like, what, 40 years old now?
Jesus, you're right. It is 40.
I know, it hurts, doesn't it?
Oh, God. My brain was like, this isn't that old. This is like 20... No, it is way more than 20 years ago.
No, that is the millennial curse, where it's like, 40 years ago. Yes, the 1960s. No, the 1980s.
No. You know what's even worse? Is the reboot Conan movie with Jason Momoa is
10 years
is
old.
10 years old.
Yep.
Fuck.
There's
I know,
a
right?
movie.
So,
Now,
like-
there's a movie I can shit on all day.
Okay, there we go. I'm glad we found it.
But, like, you know, it's a bit older now. It's really, you're starting to feel like the age. You know, Steve, you and I have talked about this, where for all their faults, modern movies have really good pacing compared to, like, the further back you go in films, the worse the pacing gets. Because people just are learning more. And so this has, you know, it's just a bit slow for me. Things last longer than I feel they need to. I feel like trying to build tension or sit on a moment in scenes, but it just kind of goes on for a minute.
So
The scene that kind of got me is I was like legitimately interested in it, and then Haley just started laughing, and it kind of did kind of undercut it and kill it for me. Was like when James Earl Jones transforms into a snake, because it's like on one level it's really cool, on another level they just keep like cutting back to his face stretching out like 2 or 3 times, which felt a little bit unnecessary. And it's just, I don't know, I just kind of, just some of that stuff doesn't really necessarily hold up super well in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
I guess maybe just for context, I should say, for Cinema Month that I have forced us all into, why the fuck are we starting with Conan the Barbarian starring Arnold Schwarzenegger? I feel like that
was your choice.
Yeah. So let me try and explain here exactly what was going through my dumb fuck mind when I said Conan the Barbarian was cinema. So
It is, but explain.
it is. It is absolutely cinema. But okay, so we have gotten to this point where I think there's a lot of false binaries and truisms when it comes to talking about movies. There is this idea that like there were artsy movies and then there were blockbuster movies. There's this idea that like artistic directors shouldn't be tied down to doing franchise movies, but then also franchise movies need to not care about the artistic vision and just kind of appeal to the franchise. There's all of these things that go on in modern movies where I feel like we've sort of like lost sense of the history of these things, because as I love to remind people, Star Wars was an indie art house movie in 1977 that turned into a blockbuster. And back in the day, we used to have a lot of movies where a lot of directors where the goal was to make a steady stream of art house movies that kind of progressively allowed you to make something akin to a blockbuster. That's why Jaws is as big as it is. That's why Star Wars is as big as it is. That's why stuff like Alien and Blade Runner are as big as they are. I mean, they didn't do super well when they first came out, but that was the intention, is that you take all of your indie sensibilities and over time you grow it to having a large audience and making something that has a mass appeal. And we still make those kinds of movies, but we sort of pretend like these are two separate sides of the equation, where like you can have dumb fun blockbusters like Top Gun Maverick, but that's not like an artist making a statement on a character or making a drama or something. That's just dumb fun blockbuster. That like somehow there was a cap that has been created on making artsy movies. And so I thought, okay, let's trace a lineage of like 4 movies that are all effectively the same movie, but are done from like 4 different perspectives on what this blockbuster artistic divide is, and just kind of go through the range of why they were like this and what's changed and what isn't. So the first like pairing in that would be Conan the Barbarian from '82 and The Northman from this year, because those are basically the same movie. It's kind of weird how much they are the exact same movie, but one's like a art house hyper realistic movie, and the other one is like a big dumb blockbuster. But if you go back and listen to John Molina's talk about this movie, this is an artsy movie for him. This is a movie where there's a very minimal dialogue. A lot of the sets are painted. His idea for it was this is basically an opera where the music is kind of overbearing. People are kind of standing in slow motion. Everything is supposed to be big, bold, and mythic, and to create this impression that you're watching essentially a barbarian opera. I mean, it's very overt about like why it opens with a Nietzsche quote, and there are references to Wagner's The Ring, and like there's like a body of literature on Conan the Barbarian 1982 as it relates to like German theater. So like this is an artsy dude making a blockbuster movie with mass appeal, and I feel like that's just not a thing we do a lot anymore. And when you go back and watch it with that in mind, I feel like it really holds up. Like, I feel like the sort of slower pace of older movies that you were talking about, that's true, but I feel like it's actually really deliberate in this one. It's trying to be a slow burn, moody, operatic movie. It's not going out of its way to be fast-paced, even though it has every right to by the time you get to 1982.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that could certainly be part of it. It's just, that's always something I notice with older films, is they're just slower. Like, still the best piece of film editing, video editing, whatever you want to call it, I'd seen in narrative is the very first episode of the BBC Sherlock series. And I go to that because it is the most viscerally, fast-paced, edited thing I think I've ever seen. And I guarantee you, if I could time travel and take it back and show it to audiences back in like the 1920s, they would not be able to understand what is going on. And that's something like I just think is a factor of how things evolve over time, and how the ability for film as a medium to convey meaning through images has gotten so good, and how audiences have gotten like wise to it. And are able to understand film language in that way. So that's just all to say. This movie felt like slow to me. Whether that was intentional or not doesn't really matter. I don't really care. It just was slow. Like, if he did it on purpose, that's fine.
So I guess my pushback is not that you're wrong for feeling like it's slow and being disengaged because it was slow. That's fine. All I'm saying is, the argument you're making about old movies being slower, I don't think actually applies when you start talking about movies from 1982. Because after we get into the 80s, I think that just stops being true, and we've like developed a lot of rapid cutting and editing by that point. So this is more of a throwback movie in the 80s than it is now.
I mean, maybe. When did Blade Runner come out?
Blade Runner is... Fuck, I feel like I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. I think that's like mid-80s.
Yeah, like I agree that the 80s is when things really start to pick up. I think a lot of that has to do with the...
Oh, it's the same year, actually, 1982.
Okay. I will say that I think the 80s pacing starts to pick up quite a bit, and I think a lot of that has to do with the invention of music videos. But I mean... that's like a completely separate topic. I was just saying that as a general thing of... I tend to notice that with older movies. It doesn't necessarily have to be a part of this. But it's just... I don't know, this movie just felt slow, and it didn't really do much for me, in large part because of that. Not that it made it bad, it's just like, you know, there was a point where I started falling asleep during the movie, not gonna lie. We had a huge thunderstorm here last night, so that kept me from falling asleep during the movie, but the movie itself didn't quite do that for me. But you know what? Matt, you were like, oh, I'm so excited. I've got notes. I want to talk about stuff, and you've been so quiet for the longest time.
Like I have anything to say about the general trend of pacing in films pre and post 1980. I don't give a fuck. I'm here to talk about Conan.
Wait, so let me ask you a question, Matt, because I'm curious about your answer here.
Okay.
How do you feel about this version of Conan kind of just being Kroll the Conqueror?
Yeah, I don't like it. He's not
Okay.
Conan.
That's what I wanted to see. Like, what do you feel about like Arnold in the role, and how do you feel about the fact that he's kind of just not Conan?
Think about this movie. Like, Arnold in the role is great, the role that he has written. This is not Conan. This is not remotely Conan the Barbarian. This is not remotely Conan of Cimmeria, which is probably the biggest, like, point of contention for Conan fans with this movie, is that while it is a good movie, and while it does have this sense of grandeur and this big epic fantasy storytelling, it's not terribly representative of the source material, either in respect to its principal character or the world at large. And that's one of those things where it's like, that's, you know, you're looking at it as an adaptation and as a standalone piece. As a standalone piece, like I said, I think this works, and I think everything you're saying is 100% true. As an adaptation, it's kind of frustrating because you're taking a character who has like a very rich history in literature in the 30s, and even some of the pastiche pulp novels in like the 60s, and some of the early Marvel comics, and you're then writing a movie that is really not that character, that more or less dumbs that character down to the point where he's borderline unrecognizable. And then that particular portrayal of the character has gone on to be the public's understanding of that character. Now, Steve, you're an Iron Man fan, so you should know how that feels.
Oh, absolutely. I was like, Robert Downey Jr. here again.
And that's basically what this is. And the biggest difference really comes down to Conan's backstory, I guess. Like, obviously you can change a character's backstory and still have it be the same character, but in this case, Conan being raised in slavery and then freed by the time he's like in his 20s or whatever, however old Conan is supposed to be in this, like nebulously like 20s or maybe 30s, I don't know, is it alters the character drastically from the literary Conan, Robert E. Howard's Conan, who has been an adventurer for many years by the time he's this age, who is actually talks very often and is in fact incredibly intelligent. He's intelligent in that way that someone who has traveled the world just knows things and is able to apply those things he's learned as he's traveled throughout the world. He's very clever.
I feel like they try to kind of have their cake and eat it too, though, with that, right? Because I don't think this Conan is necessarily, a barbarian per se, but they have that moment early on in the opening kind of like 20-minute montage before he's like really Conan, where they try to make a point out of saying that like, oh, he's trained with masters and he learns weaponry and he reads poetry and philosophy. And that never actually amounts to anything or comes up, but it felt like a weird thing to throw in there while he's also a slave.
It's very odd because you're juxtaposing that with like, okay, so he's a pit fighter, so they train him so he'll be the best pit fighter. And then they're like, oh, but also they bring him all these books so he can learn things. And yet he still like doesn't quite understand that he's been freed, and they have to like push him away and like, no, you're free, go. And it is very odd that they do that, and then they still write him as sort of, he's not an idiot, but he's not an idiot, so it is odd.
He's Arnold.
Yeah, he's Arnold. He's Arnold. And this movie just has a weird relationship with its source material, and I find that aspect of it really interesting personally, and so that's something I always kind of latch onto when I'm watching it.
Okay, can I jump in for a sec here?
No, you're not fucking allowed. This is my show now.
Oh, okay. So like, can we just talk about the real reason that Steve picked this and like divorce ourselves from his whole, oh, blockbusters and cinema used to be the same thing? Can we just talk about the fact that Steve clearly picked this because this movie's fucking horny, but in a weird way?
Oh, I love how horny this movie is. In very specific and interesting ways.
I mean, that's one of the ways it is fairly reflective of the source material. The source material is horny as fuck.
Well, what's cool is that like this movie has that same sort of like, and I don't know what it was, what kind of fucking Kool-Aid we were drinking in the early to mid '80s, but so many blockbusters in the early to mid '80s have a weird homoerotic vibe. Like this comes out in '82, Top Gun is '86, The Lost Boys is around there. Like there's just so many fucking weird homoerotic movies in the '80s, but this one is really interesting because you open the movie with young baby Arnold Conan kid who can't particularly act either, getting a lesson from his dad about his sword, and that how life is effectively steel. And then you kind of transition out of Conan's origin after the first 20 minutes or first 30 minutes or so when he finds that sword underground, and he breaks the rust off of it. And then there's kind of like these slow montages where he's kind of just like, just caressing his sword because it's his dick. And then you get to that middle juncture where he's told, it's not about the sword, it's about making the flesh strong. And it's a really interesting movie where it kind of takes Conan from seeing himself as a tool to seeing himself as a person. And you have that like really beautiful contrast at the end after everything's over. And he's got the broken sword on one hand and the complete sword on the other hand. And he's just kind of stopping to think about it. And I don't know, I feel like there is something in this movie somewhere that's in a lot of sword and sorcery movies, to be fair, that is kind of like trying to introspect on the expectations of being like a big, burly, manly man. Conan books do that sometimes. Solomon Kane does that, so Robert E. Howard wasn't over it. The Northman does this. The Green Knight does this. Both movies that we're going to eventually talk about here. It's interesting that like it's horny, but it's like thoughtfully horny because it's not just Conan going around fucking everyone. He's like really sitting there thinking about what it means to be the weapon.
He's really thinking about what it means to fuck someone.
Well, yeah, exactly. What does it mean to stab someone with your sword repeatedly?
Yeah. No, I was just like, the thing that made me think about it is just how like fucking weird the scene in the life and times of Conan the Barbarian early 20-minute montage is. Because they throw a naked woman in like cage with him, and it's like the movie seems to communicate. Oh, but he's like good at heart. He's not a rapist. See, he puts his cloak on her, and then he just like lays her down and takes the cloak off her and fucks her. And like, okay, so he's not a rapist. He's like a respectful rapist, right? Like I don't know what the fuck that particular scene was. That one confused the fuck out of me, no joke.
I don't know. I thought that one was pretty clear because you had that moment where Mako was giving the narrator, and that's the exact scene where he's saying Conan was reading philosophy and poetry, and then they throw the woman in and said he also pleasures women, and so it's almost like he's got like this very romantic idea of what he's doing, but that's not actually the case, and that's kind of the whole contrast for the movie, where he thinks what he's doing is his mission in life. He has kind of thought out in a very sort of basic way, but he thinks it's a lot more complicated than it is. And by the end of it, he realizes it's actually a lot simpler. And so, like, you have that scene a little bit after that where they're all talking about, like, well, what's the meaning of life? And he says to kill your enemies and to hear the lamentations of their women. But it doesn't play that scene, I don't think, like 100% seriously. I don't think it's the idea that he thinks that's 100% true. I think he is kind of just thinking about that's sort of what life has been reduced to. And he likes to think of himself as understanding it more than that, but he doesn't know how to go further than that. And it's not until the very end of the movie when he actually saves a girl and he sees the broken sword in hand where he realizes, oh, maybe there is a little bit more to life here.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. It was just that was a weird scene for me. In this Me Too era, I did not know what the fuck the read on that scene was meant to be.
I'm sure Conan would be canceled.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe, and that's why Matt's just pissed, is he'll never get a good Conan movie now because it'd be all like woke SJW garbage.
That is certainly the opinion of a lot of Conan fans. I personally think that Conan is the perfect property to revisit some of these stories with kind of a fresh eye and try to update them in certain ways. I mean, like, I don't know that we'll ever get another Conan movie, but I'm sure as fuck we will eventually get that Red Sonja movie, because Conan's cast of characters is filled with so many powerful and well-known female characters, several of which aren't always used the way they should be, because a lot of Howard's writing, while it is reverent of the strength that these women also have, it also feels like that strength is in spite of their femininity, that it is something that their femininity is almost something that they have to overcome, that they still have to kind of deal with. You have Valeria from Red Nails, who is, by all accounts, Conan's equal in strength, but yet she finds herself in peril in multiple situations. And Red Nails gets in a whole... Red Nails is the story that Valeria comes from, and we'll talk about Valeria a little bit more. But that just gets into... There's a lot of homoeroticism in that, although it's more focused on lesbianism, and it goes in... I'm going on a tangent. But the
Red
point
Sonja
is...
is actually an interesting contrast there too, with your point about them having to overcome being feminine, because I feel like that's sort of the epitome of that concept, since her entire origin story is being raped and then being like, okay, now we need to make sure this never happens again.
So, like, I think Conan as a property is legitimately ripe for exploring these ideas and not shying away from them, but exploring them in a way that is not purely exploitative. I think it just takes the right approach. I mean, you look at like Gail Simone's Red Sonja and stuff like that, and I think we're already seeing that. I just don't know if we'll ever see that on like the big screen again. I just don't know that like Conan has the draw that it once had back in the heyday of the Marvel comics.
I don't know, I feel like it's kind of maybe now or never with Conan, with how big Game of Thrones is and how big House of the Dragon's about to be when it drops in August. I feel like we're kind of...
You hope.
Yeah, and you hope. With the new Lord of the Rings show. And I feel like, and this is another avenue to do a tangent because I'm curious about this, but this movie doesn't do a particularly good job, or nor does it even really care to capture the Hyborian Age the way Robert E. Howard envisioned it, like at all.
No,
like it's just barbarians with Robert E. Howard names, but it's not that world at all. And that world is a lot more complicated in the books, and is probably closer to something like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. Not in like the high fantasy elements, but in like the complicated politics.
So like one of Howard's big themes throughout his short stories is Conan is like, you know, he comes from a barbarian tribe, right? You know, he's not stupid, but he has a very kind of simple understanding of the world. He believes in how he should behave. He believes in how he feels he should treat other people. And so what Howard likes to do is put him into these big cities. He'll take him to huge cities in like Aquilonia that are steeped in politics, that are steeped in city people with their rules and their backstabbing. And Conan doesn't really understand that. So I remember, so Queen of the Black Coast. Queen of the Black Coast is one of the most famous Conan stories of all time. That story starts with him being chased out of a port town in Argos. I'm not gonna bother. So he gets passage on a ship, and they ask him like, "Yo, why were guards trailing you before we take you on our ship?" And he's just like, "Fuck if I know, man. This one guard was hitting on this dude's bitch, and that dude said some shit to him. Shit got crazy. They pulled me in to be a witness. I told him to fuck off and told them what I knew, and they got all pissy with me about it. And so I'm here now. I don't understand." And that's kind of his... And so, like, Howard's whole thing is just saying that, like, Conan is sort of more noble as a savage than these city people and their politics and their endless, internal strife. And so that comes up a lot here in Conan's stories, and like the way that civilizations cause their own downfall because of like infighting and politics and stuff like that. He'll even evoke like ideas of degeneracy leading to the downfall of a civilization, which gets into some weird territory with him. But then you get to this movie, and the Hyborian Age is not the odd mix mash of ancient cultures that it is in the books. Aquilonia, we don't get to see Aquilonia as Greece. We don't get to see Stygia as ancient Egypt. Everyone just sort of looks the same, and everyone is just sort of roving barbarians and clans people who are just completely kind of independent. We get lip service to names like Stygia and stuff like that, but then when we have this big snake cult, which by all accounts should be coming from Stygia because Set is the snake god and that's like the state religion of Stygia, Stygia is just offhandedly mentioned as another country that's dealing with this snake cult problem. And that's very just amusing to me. It's amusing to me when he's talking about Crom and he's like, oh, he will judge you worthy for God. Like, fuck no, he won't. Crom doesn't give a fuck. So, like...
Okay, but that line at the end where he's like, if you don't help me, then the hell with you,
Yeah,
that goes hard as hell.
Oh, for sure. No, Conan's prayer to Crom is like the best part of this movie. It's so
It's fucking hype. I love that
so
scene.
the riddle of steel is not the riddle of steel, and the whole Crom judging people is original to this, and it's very dumb when it's
Well, and it's very much the
taken
opposite
as
of what
an
you're saying too. Where like, if the idea in the books is that even as a barbarian, Conan is more civilized than modern society in certain ways, this movie's almost the opposite, where it's like Conan lives in a society of barbarians and aspires to be more.
He lives in a society, as it
He does. He does indeed live in a society. Well, does he? Is there even society? It's just
They
a lot
go
of
to-
warring clans.
They go to Zamora, which is a city in this version, which is odd. I'm like, Zamora's a country. Do your research, John Milius. Jesus Christ.
That's where they
like-
get the assignment from the king, right?
Say what?
That's when they get the assignment from the king to go find his daughter, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. I get confused because the locations literally just all look the same to me.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, well, they do. That's part of the thing, is that there's no sense of like there's no sense of identity for all these different places, and that's such an important part of the Hyborian Age is imbuing that like very distinct sense of identity. Like he does go east to like Yamatai or Kitai or I guess wherever he was going. I don't think they name drop the place. He does go east where they do have Japanese looking crap, and that's a thing. But outside of that, like, I mean, I wouldn't even say that the snake cult is particularly Fijian or Egyptian looking, and that's obviously not what they're going for. But as a Conan fan, it's certainly disappointing. But what can you do? What was I gonna say? I was gonna say something. Oh, right. But they do draw a lot of like ideas from the stories. When Conan is like crucified, that comes from A Witch Shall Be Born, I think, which is not considered a very good story, but whatever. And then
That shot of him on the tree is probably the most iconic shot in this whole movie, I feel
it's
like.
really iconic. It's really good.
It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah, there's a lot of iconography from this that is really stuck, like the Wheel of Pain that the slaves are pushing. That's like really stuck from this, and being crucified, and obviously like the logo, the sword. Like this movie visually defined a lot of aspects of Conan, kind of in a for better or worse situation, like with Iron Man. And I think a lot of it is good. Like I think John Milius, his direction here is solid. It's just when you try to approach it as a representation of what the Hyborian Age is supposed to be, that's where you just kind of have to separate it, 'cause it's just not going for the same thing. It's not the same thing. and you're pretty much just dealing with like set pieces that are lifted from stories, like climbing a tower to get a red jewel. That's pretty much straight out Tower of the Elephant. Except the difference being that when he gets to the top of Tower of the Elephant, it gets all fucking cool and cosmic horror-y and awesome. Whereas this, he gets to the top and he just finds a jewel and that's it. But they do fight a big snake. There's that.
They definitely do pull a lot and create a lot of iconography. The thing that surprised me is that there's stuff in the books that visually sounds cool as hell that the movie just completely avoids. Yep. Like Thusula Doom having a fucking skull head. Where is that?
There's a funny story about that I've been trying to corroborate. So if anyone wants to fact check me, feel free. But I've been trying to corroborate this and I just haven't been able to. But apparently, so Thulsa Doom, not a Conan character. He's a Cole the Conqueror character.
As is this movie. Go on.
Yes. Thoth-Amon is arguably Conan's archenemy. If you're going to give Conan an archenemy, it's arguably Thoth-Amon. Now, Thulsa Doom here acts much more like Thoth-Amon, I would argue, but I haven't read a lot of Cole the Conqueror, so don't quote me on that. But yes, Thulsa Doom, he normally has a skull for a head. Now, in the original Oliver Stone draft of the script, he had a skull for a head. Now, at that point, they were approaching Mattel, and they said, hey, yo, Star Wars toys made, like, bank. Do you guys want in on this, maybe? And Mattel was like, bet. So they sent Mattel the Oliver Stone script, along with, like, I think, like, some concept art and stuff like that. This part is where it's kind of debatable. At some point, Mattel backs out. And supposedly the reason for that is because when John Milius started rewriting the script, he was taking out a lot more of the fantastical elements, because Oliver Stone's script would have been like a fucking nightmare to film back then, because it was so like crazy with all the different like supernatural and fantastical stuff. And so Mattel started looking at the rewritten script. They saw that it had less fantastical elements. They saw it was pushing the rating a little bit harder. And they were just like, yeah, no, we don't really want to do this anymore. But they had invested all this time and resources into making a big burly barbarian and a dude with a skull for a head. And got He-Man and Skeletor.
Hey, let's go. The secret origin.
The exact details of how all that played out, there's a little bit of hearsay going on there. I've tried for the life of me to like really corroborate all of that, but that is supposedly the gist of how all that went down, and I think that's pretty fucking cool, actually.
Apparently, Tim Seeley, the guy who co-wrote Grayson and wrote Rebirth Nightwing for a little while, and the guy the internet hates because he wrote a book about the Robins, and that's apparently a bad thing. But anyway, apparently he is like a really, really big Masters of the Universe scholar, and like he's written Masters of the Universe comics and stuff, and he consults on the TV show. And he's corroborating everything you're saying, so I feel like you're probably right.
Cool. Oh, speaking of Tim Seeley, go check out Barbaric that he's been pimping, because it's really good.
Tim Seeley fucking rules. I really like Tim Seeley.
Yeah. But, yeah, so I think, like, I don't know, the production of this movie is super fascinating to me for those reasons. And it is kind of funny. I heard someone joking that they were just like, yeah, I don't think Mattel was that excited to make a Conan crucified on the Tree of Woe playset.
The fact
Why
that
not?
I know, right? I'd be down.
The fact that Oliver Stone wrote the script that went more hardcore is the thing that blows my mind. Like, fucking JFK, dude, wrote a hard-ass Conan movie?
Dude, but apparently he was, like, fucking... I don't know what drug it was, but I'm just gonna say coked out. Apparently he was fucking coked out of his goddamn mind when he wrote it.
That's amazing.
And apparently, like, it's a little weird. I haven't read the script. Like, I've been meaning to, like, seek it out. I just don't read screenplays typically. But yeah, apparently he was, like, fucking wasted or high out of his mind when he wrote the script. And I've even heard he was envisioning this, like, 12-movie fucking epic. And it just... And the producers were just like, whoa, hold up. Yeah, it's an interesting production for sure.
Ian, what you got?
So why no like final battle between James Earl Jones and Arnold Schwarzenegger, besides the fact that James Earl Jones is not exactly the fittest guy. Why no? Why no battle? Like, he could have turned into a snake. They didn't have to make it James Earl Jones himself fighting. Why no fight? I will, like, legit say, legitimately disappointed he did not fight him as a snake. That felt like a really big missed opportunity.
Snake budget on the one big snake fight. I don't have a good answer for you. I mean, like, if you look at like the Riddle of Steel, and you have Conan viewing steel as something you can trust and something that is strong, and Ulsa Doom is over here saying like, no, steel is weak compared to flesh, and flesh is where there's power. I mean, I guess it's Ulsa Doom gains his power by manipulating and lording over others, despite never exerting strength himself. And Conan sort of comes to that realization of his own independent will and being able to overcome that. And so, like, I don't know, maybe it's toppling a pathetic man who used his cult to make him seem more than what he was. And at the end of the day, he could not hold his own. He could not fight Conan because he relied on his people to do it for him. Maybe it's that kind of idea.
Okay, so I've got this covered because you knew you were in trouble when this movie opened with a Nietzsche quote. So let me go on a little sidebar here. All right, so Nietzsche is a very, very popular, very confusing, and very difficult to teach philosopher. And I've talked to a lot of people who have like outright said they just refuse to teach Nietzsche in undergrad classes because it's just too fucking easy to make him sound insane. And people start running with things that are literally not what you are saying because it's just too easy. And so you kind of need like a bit of like distance and a more sort of like mature setting where people are not inclined to just run away with bad ideas. However, what I'm about to present to you is one of those things. So just keep that in mind. This is very much a movie that read a couple of aphorisms of Nietzsche, got the gist of it right, and then extrapolated it into something that's not technically wrong, but is probably wrong. So just keep that in mind. The movie opens with that aphorism that everyone knows about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is a line from an opening section of Twilight of the Idols called Maxims and Arrows. And it's not the entire line either. It's literally just the last sentence of a much longer line. But we'll ignore that for now. And the way this movie goes, it actually does kind of mirror Nietzsche's very basic critique of religion, which is that you essentially have two categories. You've got good and you've got bad. But good and bad are not moral categories. They are entirely like factual, objective, whatever word you want to throw out there. Again, this is not exact, but we're just making it basic. The idea is just there are some people that are stronger and better and faster and smarter than other people, and then there are weak things. So there is good things and there is bad things. There is strength and then there is weakness. The big, brutish, strong people are also pretty dumb. And so the power of the weak people is to make the strong people think that their strength is a weakness. And so he creates this idea that good and bad, which are not moral categories, get turned into evil and good, which are moral categories. And the reason it's reversed is on purpose, because the idea is the strength and goodness as a non-moral thing comes first. So in order to villainize it, you have to point outwards at it first before you define yourself. The idea is you say, this thing is bad, therefore I am good, as opposed to this thing I'm doing is good and this thing that I'm not doing is bad. It's entirely reactive. You define yourself by what you are not, as opposed to what you are. And so Conan gets the Riddle of Steel, and he gets the idea that steel makes you strong. And you know what? Objectively, utilitarianly, he's totally right. Yeah, you got a sword in hand, you're probably pretty strong. But then you've got Ursula Doom, who says the opposite. And he's a cult leader, and it sort of mirrors the same sort of philosophy, or the same sort of like critique Nietzsche had of religion, where he says it's the clever people who make the strong people think that their strength is not actually strength. That he is clever enough to tell Conan, oh, you think you have a sword? Well, actually, that just makes you weak. Haha, see how smart I am. But really, that's just a way to trick people into following a very weak and poisoned lead. And so this is where religion sort of becomes a way to make people docile and define things that are outside of their control as opposed to things that are within their control. So at the end, when he beheads him with a fucking sword, he's basically just saying in that sort of Nietzschean way, no, I am overcoming your stupid manipulation because strength is actually just strength. And saying that it's not strength just to get over on people does not make it any less strong. Which is cool and interesting, and also not entirely what Nietzsche meant, but it's consistent enough to be a reading, and I kind of appreciated that.
That was
okay, but like, hear me out on this. I wanted him to fight a snake man.
Well, that's fair.
No, 100%, I am with you there. We have very few snake men fights in cinema.
For what it's worth, the Oliver Stone draft did have actual snake men.
Yeah, see, already better movie.
Something that is interesting about this movie, just from a production standpoint, because we've been talking a lot about the other production stuff, is just how much I feel like this thing gets through, like how much narrative it gets through in just a couple of hours. Because you're right, Stone wanted this to be like a really long religious epic, and John Mulaney just talked about his influences in this movie, and he pulls a lot of visual cues from them too, but he's got like a really, really high regard for stuff like Ben-Hur, and the scenes in the montage where Conan's a slave and is a gladiator pit, a lot of that is pulled from like the opening like 45 minutes of Ben-Hur, not even 45. It's
Jesus fucking Christ.
Ben-Hur,
the opening 45 minutes.
Ben-Hur is interesting because it's like a 4-hour movie, but it's also like 5 movies where like every 45-minute chunk might as well just be a movie. And out of those like multiple movies inside, about 3 of them are worth watching, and they're not in sequence. But
oh no.
But anyway, the movie within the movie of Ben-Hur, where Ben-Hur is a slave, has a lot in common with this particular movie. The difference is what they do in 3 hours is what this movie does in 30 minutes. And you can see the trajectory of history going from this is too long and boring, let's distill this down into something neat and efficient into Conan, now reversing itself, because the first 20 minutes of this movie are better paced than the entirety of Kenobi. Just saying.
Here it comes.
Just saying. Just saying.
Oh no,
but I appreciate how much you get out of Conan as a kid, his father dying, getting put into slavery, becoming a gladiator, rising through the ranks, getting his freedom, finding a sword. All of that's in like 25 minutes. Like that's really, really well paced. And even in like a modern movie like The Northman, which just came out, which has essentially the entire first setup, it takes like an hour for all of that to happen.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. Steve, just random aside, because, you know, we got time for that. What, in your opinion, is a really well-paced film?
Oh, really well? I mean, there's a lot. I don't know. Could you, like, be more specific?
No, just, like, off the top of your head, what's a film where it's like, yes, the pacing on this is perfect. This is what every film should be paced like.
I mean, I don't know if I'd say that about any movie, but, like, I don't fucking know.
There's a lot. I can't think of it.
I mean, yeah, because there's just so many. Like, I don't know what necessarily you want me to pick in this situation. I mean, just because I saw a tweet about it, Marriage Story is a really well-paced movie. Anything Noah Baumbach does is really, really well-paced because his movies tend to have very intentful scenes that kind of go on for a while, for as long as they need to. Any David Fincher movie, all of his movies are exceptionally well-paced. That dude knows exactly what to do with the camera. If you're talking about like older movies, like It's a Wonderful Life is paced really well despite being as long as it is for the time. I just watched The Best Years of Our Lives, which is like a 3-hour movie from 1946, and it's paced really well.
All right, fair enough. Just curious, because, like, I don't know, you seem to get off on pacing a lot. Me too, but I just never know.
I just feel like we have perfected this old soldier formula of the sad old man coming out of retirement for one last mission, to the point where if it takes you an hour to get him on the mission, you have fucked up. It's profoundly
fair.
fucked up, given how many times we have done this.
No, that's fair. That was just, again, just random curiosity. I don't know. I'm just in a place with this movie where, like, I don't have a ton of strong opinions on it, I guess. I've noticed that I've kind of, like, fallen to the background here, which is fine, because Matt's got a whole lot to say about it, so I'll throw it back over to him. He can decide our next direction. Yeah, he can decide our next direction. It's just, like, I'm just in a place where I'm like, I don't like it enough to really praise it, and I don't hate it enough to really rag on it, you know? I'm kind of just in that, like, it's fine phase with this one. So forgive my lack of engagement. But Matt, why don't you keep going? I'm excited that you're excited.
It's true.
I think I would probably be in the same ballpark as you, Ian, if I didn't have any attachment to the franchise. Because my attachment to Conan came before I watched this movie. I got into Conan through this game called Conan Exiles that I got really fucking into. And that, like, so, like, there's this game called Conan Exiles, and it's like one of the, like, dime a dozen survival games on Steam in the same vein as, like, Ark and stuff like that. But I started playing on it, and they had these, like, role-playing servers that were really cool because they had these mods where they would have like character sheets, so you could literally, like, be talking to someone in local chat and, like, do a, like, dice roll using this, like, mod. And so it was just basically like playing out a D. So it was fun, and I was like, no, I'm gonna go hard. I'm gonna make, like, a really cool backstory. And so I studied up on Conan lore, and I was like, oh shit, I love this. And then I just started reading all of it. And so this movie is just kind of funny to me because I had literally no strong opinions on it until I was already, like, kind of super into Conan. The other thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about Valeria and the love story here. So I'll start off with the kind of background here. So Valeria, one of Conan's many female supporting cast members. Like, I wouldn't really call her a supporting cast member because it's not like she shows up all the time. But she was introduced, like I mentioned earlier, in the story Red Nails. Red Nails is probably the most, like, quintessential Conan short story. Like, if you were gonna read one Conan short story, and that's it, Red Nails is probably a good one. That one, or maybe, like, Tower of the Elephant. Those would be, like, the two I would be like, that's the one you should probably read. It was the last one that Robert E. Howard wrote before he committed suicide tragically after the death of his mother. Because Robert E. Howard had, like, I mean, it's debatable because obviously no one knows, but he had what most people seem to believe was, like, diagnosable depression, but it was, you know, in the 30s, and that just, treatment was not as much of a thing. And then his mother fell terminally ill. There's a biopic about it starring Vincent D'Onofrio. You can just watch that. Anyways, so Red Nails was the last story that he published before he died. And Red Nails is where Valeria is introduced, and Valeria is not this character. That's a little bit frustrating, but whatever, that's fine. Valeria is a super hot, blonde, busty pirate. Robert E. Howard really likes busty, hot pirate chicks, and I'm not judging him on that.
He is completely right, and we should stand.
That's fair. We stand busty, hot pirate chicks. Because
he is completely right, and we should stand, except for the racism.
Except for the racism stuff.
I can excuse racism in this instance.
Well, okay.
Robert E. Howard's racism is very, in his short stories, is very, very of its time. If you read Red Nails, you will get a lot of, I didn't think black people could do this. There is a lot of that in Red Nails, unfortunately, but whatever. So, like, Valeria, she's a pirate. She's an Aquilonian pirate, and she meets Conan in this jungle where she's very not excited about being there because she's just not she's not as confident, she's not her vote, whatever. It's not important. This character is not really Valeria. This character more closely resembles the other most well-known Conan character that's a woman, which is Belit, the pirate queen, who is another pirate. So Belit is someone that Conan meets early in his adventuring days, and they're just like digging on each other's vibes real hard. They just fall in love almost immediately. And then they just go fucking pillage and plunder for a while as like pirate royalty, and it's great. And then Belit dies, sacrificing herself for Conan, and Conan's really upset about it, and this big flying monkey monster comes to attack Conan, and Belit's spirit shows up and blocks the sword, and it's just like, oh, I will always be with you. And then Conan's like, oh, fuck yeah, and then he kills the thing that was trying to kill him. So they literally take a character named Valeria and just make her Belit, and
Yeah, to the point where they get her like Belit's thing. That's hilarious.
yeah, they take what Belit is, like they take Belit's story and then just slap Valeria.
Oh, I know the perfect comparison. It's like Tim Drake in Batman the Animated Series is actually just Jason Todd.
Exactly. Every fucking time Bruce Timm was like, we kind of combined both. No, you fucking didn't. You just stole one dude's name.
Yeah, that's exactly
Not what
it is.
combining is, goddammit.
Because even if you look at like the Wikipedia article for this that goes over the production, they're like, oh well, they combined elements of Valeria, and I'm like, no, they fucking didn't. There's nothing about Valeria in here other than she's blonde. And
Yeah, they combined important elements of both characters, Matt.
yeah, there you go. But she's she's very like this character, very indicative of how a lot of female characters are presented in Conan. She is Conan's equal, arguably, in combat, and she just finds Conan extraordinarily, because like Valeria in Red Nails does not put up with Conan's shit. She thinks he's annoying as fuck, and she does not care for the man until the very, very end, where he kind of starts to win her over a little bit. Whereas this Valeria is like digging on Conan right away. And so I think that's all very interesting, and from a production standpoint. But I'm curious to people who have less invested in this than I do. What did you think of Valeria and the romance between her and Conan?
There was a
really like that
romance
part.
between her and Conan.
They're fucking like pretty quickly after they start doing shit together.
Yeah, but there was a romance?
I mean, they care about each other, and they got that whole bit where he's burning her like on the pyre, and Sabotage is all just like, I must cry for him because he does not cry. And like, yeah, like it's kind of the same thing with him and Billy. It's like there's this like toxic masculine thing going on there where like Conan very much cares about this character, but doesn't show it in a way that like one would expect someone to. Now, if that's not communicated well enough through the film, I suppose that's fair. I'm just probably reading too much from the actual story it's pulling from. So I'm just curious.
No, I mean, I think it's communicated just fine in the film. It's just like the romance begins when he puts a jewel in her hand, and then it like just kind of is. It's not. I guess it's okay. Here we go. I guess it is a very like masculine idea of a romance that just doesn't translate to me at all. And get what you will from me of that, but like, just it's an absolutely no, or like not no. It's the absolute literal bare minimum level of effort for a romantic like meet cute, I guess, where she's already there to service a different part of the story. She has like little to no say in actually falling in love with Conan. He doesn't really do anything to like earn it or matter. It just kind of happens because the movie wants it to.
Right.
There's very little going on here that you could call a romance. Like, I'm sure there's some fucking Tumblr fan fiction community around this movie, and they do, like, a lot with it. But, like, Steve, you and I talked about this when we were doing the Veg Bowl comic, and it's like, yeah, man, the fan fictions really filled in all the gaps. The filler in the fan fiction really filled in all the gaps for Vegeta and Bulma's romance. Like, the amount of work you would have to do for this one just cracks me up, because it's like, it's just there to provide motivation for the male figure. Obviously, there's a conversation, I guess, to be had about the fact that she essentially gets fridged in this movie, but it's just I can just clearly tell that the movie doesn't really care about her in a way that would make that conversation worth having. She just exists to service Conan as a character, which to a certain extent is fine, but, like, if you ask, what did you think of the romance? Well, there is none. She is there to, like, Valeria, as she exists in this movie, has absolutely no character of her own, divorced from what she provides as motivation to Conan.
For sure. I guess I mean more broadly, what do you think of Valeria and her part to play in the story? But you're 100% right. Valeria is there to service Conan's story and be largely a prop to prop that up. Which, yeah, is not inherently a bad thing, but given that she's the only female character of importance, I figured that was at least worth discussing.
I mean,
Yeah,
I like her.
no,
I agree she's just there to kind of prop up Conan's story, but I feel like everyone here kind of is. Like, this is like a mood piece where I don't particularly think that making her more three-dimensional would matter, given that even Conan is barely above two-dimensional. He's a two-dimensional character going on an arc to come up with the idea that, oh, maybe there's a third dimension to existence, you know? Like, that's kind of the playground we're in, where even the romance, I feel like it's less like, do they have romantic chemistry, and more so is it just, this is a world where everyone just goes around and bands together and fucks and kills, and it's like the fourth person he's fucked in this movie by that point, that I didn't think of it as anything more significant than any of the other romances. I mean, he literally just, like, walks into town and the lady's like, hey, do you want to come inside? And then they fuck, and then she starts turning into a demon, and it's weird. And that's just another Tuesday at Conan the Barbarian's place, you know? Like, I think all of that stuff is mostly fine. I like her in this because I like her performance a lot. And I think that little middle segment of the movie where the narrator is all dramatic, where it's like, even success is where you have your most trying tribulations, or whatever bullshit he says, where, like, they're all just kind of banded together and things are kind of good. I think that chunk of it is really good. I like a lot of her lines too. Like, I feel like she gets a lot of fun, just, like, hardcore things to say, where, like, after they rescue Conan from the from being crucified, she's like, do the gods owe you any favors? Like, that's just a really cool thing to say. I like her. I think she's good. I think the actress does a really good job. Apparently, in the production of this movie, they didn't have any stunt women that were, like, as tall as her, so she just had to do all of her own stunts, and that she was really fucking terrifying. And she kind of, like, throws Arnold under the bus, where it's like, she literally almost lost a finger, and the stuff that the men had to go through in this, like, literally would have cracked their skulls. And Arnold just didn't, because he didn't have to. So that's
really
funny.
I'm surprised he had enough clout to get away with it at that time.
I don't even know if it's much about clout. It's just, I think by that point in Hollywood, like, stunt workers have their own unions and stuff, and so, like, it kind of got to the point where, like, you probably couldn't get away with just throwing an actor out of stunt anymore. I guess, except in this case.
I'm trying to figure out what he did before this. That what roles did Arnold Schwarzenegger turn down? Then there's just a really cursed Photoshop of Schwarzenegger's head on the Christopher Reeve Superman body.
That's
Okay.
horrible. He did Hercules before this, if I remember right.
Yeah, Hercules was his debut. Oh, that's much earlier than I thought. That's 1970. Hercules was his first movie. Then he doesn't work for 3 years until he gets The Long Goodbye in 73. And then, yeah, so 10 years before Conan, or 9 years before Conan. Like, he really does not have much of a thing. So he's got Hercules, The Long Goodbye, Happy Anniversary and Goodbye TV movie, Stay Hungry, The Streets of San Francisco, The San Pedro Beach Bums, The Villain, Scavenger Hunt, The Jane Mansfield Story, Conan. So I think it is fair to say this is like his breakout role.
Well, yeah,
This is the thing that
after
gets
this
him
would be
popular.
Terminator, I think.
Terminator's 84.
84. Okay, yeah. So like literally the next movie that would have come out would have been Terminator, because this would only be like 2 years later, I guess.
No, actually the next movie that comes out is Conan the Destroyer.
Oh, okay.
The Destroyer.
So he does. So he does Hercules, which is his debut, but not necessarily like a breakout movie aside from the fact that Arnold's really big. Then he does like a bunch of minor roles and cameos and a bunch of shit no one's ever seen. And then Conan puts him on the map, and he becomes like a movie star with the Terminator.
Mm-hmm. It's weird. He's apparently in the Red Sonja movie that came out in 85, which I didn't even know existed, but he doesn't play Conan.
Oh, Valeria. She's in that movie too, and she doesn't play Valeria.
Yeah, that's a whole fucking thing. There's like a whole story behind that. I don't remember what it is, but yeah, in the Sonya movie, he's just there, but as someone completely different.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Not since watching Doctor Who have I seen such incompetent bullshit.
But unlike Doctor Who, someone isn't going to come and try and make sense out of it as if it was on purpose the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You're never going to get the Stephen Moffat movie of Conan where it's like, actually, Red Sonja, the reason this dude's face is the same as Conan is because I'm trying to send you a message from beyond.
Mm-hmm.
I remembered this for my several hundred years of life, just for this moment.
Yep, exactly that. It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I like her. I think she's really good in this movie. I think everyone, all the like the sort of bit actors and character bits are all good and interesting. Obviously, James Earl Jones is like the really only like big name person in this movie that's like turning in a performance, and everyone else is just kind of delivering very sparse dialogue. But given the vibes of it, I think it works. I mean, Mako probably has the most to say because he's the fucking narrator. But I think he's very iconic. I think he kind of sets a mood, and like the end of the movie, I was surprised that the credits come up or like the epilogue comes on screen, and he's not reading it because we parody that shit all over the place. Like that's probably the most iconic thing out of this movie is the shot of him at the end as King Conan with the little title card that tells you what happened afterwards.
You know what it reminded me of, which I'm sure this is like, it's one of those things where I've seen the reference before I've seen the original, right? It reminded me of the end of the first God of War game, where like before they knew they were going to get a sequel, and they're like, and he sat upon the throne as the God of War, looking over humanity in their battles for ages to come. And they show like, up to World War II or some shit. And then in the next game, he's like, still the Greek God of War.
That's really funny. Yeah, no, it's interesting how often that thing comes up. Like, it's just a really iconic shot, and it's kind of a shame that we never got the actual King Conan Legacy sequel that they promised us a few years ago, because that would have been kind of hype.
I mean, he could play it now. Arnold's old.
Well, no, they greenlit it, and then it just like never happened for whatever reason.
Yeah, but they should still do it.
A lot of there's a lot of like Conan productions that never made it out. Like there was going to be a Red Nails animated film in the mid 2000s that was going to have Ron Perlman as Conan.
Oh, that would slap.
And Mark Hamill was going to play Chakotay, I believe is who he was going to play, who is just a character in Red Nails. And yeah, Ron Perlman actually he voices Conan in the Conan like hack and slash game for the PS3. He's fucking great. He's a great Conan. So it's a shame that that didn't happen because yeah, there's a lot of like great because like even the current Red Sonja movie has been in production hell for like a minute. So.
Yeah,
Or it's-
that one's interesting because there's been so many people attached to it, and I think at one point Gail Simone did actually like turn in a movie script for that, and it just never came into fruition.
Yeah, sounds about right. That's usually how that goes.
I do. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna ask if anyone else has anything else they want to talk about in specific. I'm just trying to think of anything else to say.
My big thing was just I was surprised by like how much this movie kind of goes out of its way to kind of take its time with Conan as a character, because it could just kind of be a big action blockbuster and there's very little action in the movie at all. Like a lot of it is just kind of like running around and getting speechified at and then kind of standing stoically or being stuck in a trap stoically or contemplating your wounds stoically. Like it's a very kind of quiet, slow burn movie. It's only 2 hours long, and it's surprising how much of that works for me.
It's funny because like that's one of those things where it's like when I say this character's not Conan, that's not to say that there aren't occasionally moments where Robert E. Howard's Conan does kind of come through. He's got some lines that are great. I love when he meets Sabotai and he's like, "I haven't eaten in days," and Conan's like, "Who says you will?" Like that's very fucking Conan. Like that's a very Conan line. But like Conan has always been described as someone of like, what is the fucking quote? Gigantic mirth and gigantic melancholy or something like that. The idea is that like Conan, his backstory is not this tragic. Like Conan's just like a dude from a barbarian tribe who like his mother died in childbirth, but he decided he was gonna go off and just adventure and find like what the world had in store for him. It's very much like a I want more fucking Disney motivation. And he goes through these periods of being, very drunken and happy and like just loving life and enjoying himself. But then he goes through these like periods of just what's the fucking point of it all? What does it all goddamn mean? And so like there is, I think, a legitimate attempt to capture that like more contemplative side of the character, and I think that works pretty well.
I mean, there are moments. I mean, there's a director's cut to this movie that I have not seen that's a little bit longer that has some added dialogue where he is kind of more contemplative. That same scene you mentioned earlier with Subutai, he's got another line there where he's like, "For us, there is no spring, just the wind that smells fresh before the storm." Like, that's pretty hype. That's a Conan line. I want to see more of that.
That's very Conan. Conan in general just talks a lot in the books. He's a very talky person. Like he talks a lot. And I mean,
See, it's so funny because yeah, you're right. This movie must really set a fucking mood because everything I see of like Conan parodies mostly is just the most like stoic, silent motherfucker in the world. Then he just does some extreme violent shit.
That scene where he just ripped the bird's neck off.
I mean, that's like that's just like largely this movie's influence and the like post Roy Thomas leaving the Conan comics. Like, Conan's a talky motherfucker in the books, and like I said, part of that is probably just because it was the 30s. I mean, like, goddamn, in Red Nails, because I just reread Red Nails for this. There's like fucking just like 2 whole pages of just one guy talking, like just in paragraphs and paragraphs. So like it was a very talky series of books, but Conan himself is a very, very talky dude. And it was
got Hulk syndrome, where like Hulk outside of the comics, and even in some of the comics now, everyone's like just gives him the Hulk smash, or he talks in broken sentences, and a lot of the growling that gets parodied from the Bill Bixby TV show. But in the comics, like he talks fine. He's just another dude, except he's big and green. Like there is no broken Hulk speech.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, like we've said before, it's like that I guess Iron Man thing where this take on the character is not wholly divorced from the original. There are nuggets in there that are 100% Conan, but this is pretty unrepresentative of Conan as a character and the Hyborian Age in general, and this has popularized what those ideas are to people, and that's maybe a little bit frustrating. Like Jason Aaron's Conan run that he did recently is we're getting away from that now, but this was kind of...
I mean, it took 40 years.
Yeah, this was the public's perception, and probably still is. So.
I mean, he's in Savage Avengers now, and the second issue of that just dropped. So, I mean, I think that's been pretty good too.
There's another Savage. Of course, it's fucking Marvel. Why am I saying that?
Yeah,
never
they
mind.
Relaunched
Statement retracted.
They relaunched Savage Avengers with the guy who wrote Spencer and Locke. So it's got the sort of same like rompy energy to it, and it's legitimately pretty funny. And it's got Elektra Daredevil on there, and it's got...
Yeah, no. See, here's the thing. It's a Marvel comic. It's gonna be good for the first like 3 issues, and then it's gonna fall off.
I mean,
because that's what happened with the original Savage Adventures. I was so excited. Matt and I was messaging Matt talking about how cool Conan was in it, and how Conan was like calling the Punisher a bitch and shit. And I bet that it's cool for the first 3 issues, and then it's gonna fall off hard when they just run out of ideas.
I feel like you just gotta read like the good Marvel comics, because Daredevil's been good for like 40 issues, man. I don't know what you mean.
It's my thing with Marvel.
Like 20 issues.
Every time I get excited for a Marvel comic, I'm like digging it, and then like 3 issues in, 5 issues in, it just falls off.
You just gotta read the right Marvel comics. You gotta stop reading fucking satellite books. That's like someone saying like, I hate DC comics because every time it gets good, it just falls off. What did you read? Fucking Grayson.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the things I'm interested in, Steve.
I'm just saying, when a satellite book drops off, you can't blame them. It's like when people complain, why is there no Black Canary book? Because no one fucking reads Black Canary.
I don't know.
I was reading Black Canary.
I mean, I would too, but we would not sustain DC's publication of a Black Canary book.
I don't know, man. DC sales are pretty low. I'm pretty sure if like you just say, I will actually buy this comic, they might just publish it just to see.
I mean, but they might throw Batman in there just in case.
Right.
Yeah, probably.
I have scrolled through the first issue of New Savage Avengers, and I'm fucking sold.
It's fun. It's a really fun book. I like that.
All hail the new age of Set. Fucking sold. That's
Dude,
great. That's great.
it's pretty hype, and the cliffhanger like premise of the book is they all get transported back to Conan's time. So like it's the fucking Savage Avengers, except they're in the Hyborian Age. It's great.
That might interest me more, because I'm just like, I like half of the reason I like Conan is because I like the Hyborian Age as a place. It's a really cool. Like that's the thing that like. Robert E. Howard, there's a lot of fair criticism of Robert E. Howard out there, and I think that's totally fair and understandable. But like, put some respect on the man's name. The Hyborian Age as a fantasy world is so fucking crazy. Way before Tolkien had Middle Earth, he had Cole, Solomon Kane, and Conan pre-existing and living in a shared universe before Marvel was doing that shit. Like. Conan is shockingly influential, and it's always fun to revisit it, and makes me sad that the movie doesn't really like capture those things, but it is.
Well, what's really interesting too is like Conan and Solomon Kane are both created by the same guy. I think Solomon Kane came first, and he did Conan until he died, but
this is the last character, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But it's interesting because you read Solomon Kane, and he's my favorite Robert E. Howard character. I really like those stories. But you read some of that stuff, and you could like really clearly see the influences that would eventually just become like Conan stories on some level. Because Solomon Kane does also, in a very early short story, fight a dude with a skull for a head who has like a cult of snakes around him. Solomon Kane's got like this backstory that is kind of more of that adventure that gets wrapped into other people's problems that the framing device for it all is just the fact that he's a Puritan warrior, and so like he has more of a reason to get into fights, and that's kind of about it. Even some of like the early art for Solomon Kane kind of looks like what Conan looks like, except a different time period. So that stuff's interesting, and I think the Solomon Kane movie they made like 10 years ago now, God, Jesus Christ, we're so old, was also really good. Just like genuinely really good movie starring discount Hugh Jackman.
Watch. I've never. Yeah, I'll have to watch it. I'm so unfamiliar with Howard's other characters. I should.
I know very, very few of them. I know I know the stuff he's famous for creating, but the only things I've ever read by him are like Solomon Kane, Conan, and like some Call the Conqueror stuff, and that's kind of about it.
He's also written a lot of horror stuff. You'll usually find his name popping up in any like big collection of Lovecraftian horror.
Yeah.
'Cause that's the other thing with Conan is that the magic in the world of the Hyborian Age is cosmic and terrifying, and that's something that we get like a small snippet in. So like when Mako's character is like trying to like resurrect Conan, and you get that great scene where these like red creatures appear as if from nowhere and are like hounding around his body, and Valeria is starting to fight them off. Like that's a moment where I'm just like, yes, this is some Conan shit. Or like when Conan is sleeping with the witch who then like transforms, I'm just like, yeah, this is some Conan shit. And so the more like unsettling and horrific elements you can throw in there, it always makes it feel more like Conan's identity. And so there are definitely moments in here where that captures that, and I just wanted to highlight that scene with the like the red ghost figures, because I think it's a really neat moment.
That's one of those moments where I also sort of feel like the opera poster board quality of the movie is kind of like on an all-time high, where it's just imaginative and weird and kooky, and like you could paint a picture out of that scene and it would look hype as fuck. And it's one of those things where like if this was 1982 and we saw this movie, I could sort of see the argument like, okay, there's a lot of promise to turn this into a good Conan movie in the future. And then instead they made Conan the Destroyer.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for why that movie is very, very bad, but it's a shame that they didn't like take all of the stuff that they were kind of tiptoeing around in this one and turn it up to 11 instead of just getting rid of it completely.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Are there snake men in the Conan the Destroyer?
Not that I remember.
I haven't seen that movie in a minute. I don't like it. It's really boring.
It's really dull. Like if you thought,
Well, if
boring,
it's really boring, there's no way there's snake men in it.
So like that's one of the interesting things about the Jason Momoa Conan movie is that like they lean harder into the supernatural stuff, but that movie feels like one of those. I think Ian, you and I talked about this when we were talking about the 300 sequel. Like the Jason Momoa Conan movie is one of those like 300 wannabe movies. Like it's in that same vein. It's got that same like tone and that same fucking like color grade that all those fucking movies had. Like I don't know, like 47 Ronin and Gods of Egypt or whatever. Like it's in that vein. I think superficially that movie, because the tagline for the Jason Momoa Conan was born on the battlefield, because that is Conan's backstory. He was born on a battlefield. Like there was a battle happening and his mother gave birth to him and died. And so they're sort of...
That's just an irresponsible mother.
It is. So they are superficially saying this is going to be more accurate to Conan, and in some ways it is, and it just finds new ways to be awful. I would say I do think Jason Momoa looks more like what I would imagine Conan to look like. I don't like... Stop whitewashing Conan. But that's beside the point.
that movie was also a year before and reminded me very much of John Carter of Mars, which is also a shame because that's a fun movie, but has a lot of the same sort of like you said, 300 wannabe-ness to it, where it's trying to be like big and manly and epic, and it just kind of falls flat in a lot of ways. And I like a lot of the casting and the choices they made with the Jason Momoa sequel, but it's almost like they did the thing that I think a lot of reboots fall into the trap of, which is just because the other thing was different, it didn't mean that the person involved didn't have like a really clear idea of what they wanted the movie to be.
Right.
And with the Momoa one, I feel like that's just not the case, where the idea was, let's superficially get the Conan stuff, we'll name all the characters the right things, and we'll get actors that look like the parts, but we don't have a take on it. No. And we don't have anyone here that, like, has a vision for what this movie needs to be. And so it's just a superficial mess. Versus this, where it's not a particularly good Conan movie, but goddamn does John Molinas have an idea of what the fuck he wants to make, and that really gets me through it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. All right, is that where we're gonna end things though on Conan the Barbarian?
That's it. I'm tapped. I got nothing else to say. Go read Conan.
Really?
I mean, I probably could spin something else together, but go read Conan short stories, everyone. They're great, except for all the racist parts.
But you know what? Busty pirate babes, and that's the important thing.
Busty pirate chicks. The elite's walking around her pirate ship. Her tits be out. It's great.
And she gives no shits, because no one will fuck with her except Conan.
That's my favorite thing. Like, they started publishing this comic called The Cimmerian that's like, oh, we're going to adapt these stories, like, uncensored and awesome. And some of them kind of suck. Like, their Frost Giant's Daughter adaptation is fucking terrible. But they adapt Queen of the Black Coast. They still don't make her actually topless. I'm just like, but like that was one of the instances where a character actually being topless communicated something about their character and their status, and there was a reason why Bayleet was portrayed as topless. They just fucking don't, even though that's like their whole thing that they advertise themselves to be. And I just, it's very.
What if marketing is a lie?
It is. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
Alrighty. Let's go ahead and go on to ratings. I'll go first. I'll give this probably 3.5 out of 5. Hey shit, that's James Earl Jones. Yeah. Hey shit, that's Maka.
I'll give this a 4 out of 5 weird fake out zombies that don't actually come to life.
I'll give it 4 out of 5 broadswords that he just kind of smacks the rust off of.
That was fucking funny. Like, he just kept banging. Like, this is not how that would work at all.
He's just like, yes, sword. It's great. It's so great.
As we all know, rust is like a cocoon, and it protects the steel underneath.
Yes, that's how that works. Alright. What are we talking about next time, then?
All right. So as we continue our journey through cinema, we went to the 80s sword and sorcery Viking movie. So let's go to the 2020s sword and sorcery Viking movie, which is effectively the same movie, which is really fun. And it's interesting to talk about because we'll have a lot of scenes and a lot of dialogue even that just seems like it was straight up taken from this movie. But we're going to talk about Robert Edgar's new movie, The Northman, which just came out in theaters earlier this year. It's streaming and video on demand now, so you can rent it. You can pay for Peacock like a sucker, like I do, or you can torrent it.
Okay.
Or you can ask me for my Peacock password. I will.
Yeah, there you go. I'm gonna keep stealing that. Thank you, Steve.
If anyone needs profiles on streaming services, I got them all. I think my Netflix is full, but aside from that.
That's so funny. Alrighty. Everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Conan erotica lover. Yeah.
And I am the lover of busty pirate babes.
Oh man.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.
Oh god, the score's so good. I forgot to mention that. The score's really good.